The Man in the Rearview Mirror. It happened in October 2021, somewhere along Interstate 80, just outside a small town in Nebraska. I drive a long-haul truck, mostly night shifts. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I decided to pull over at a rest stop I'd never used before, exit 312, if I remember right. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 other rigs parked on the far side and a couple of cars near the restroom building. The air was cold, the kind of still silence that makes every small sound echo. I turned off the engine, left the truck idling for a bit, then finally killed the lights. I'd been driving since Kansas City, exhausted, my eyes dry and heavy. I remember thinking I'd just rest my head for 15 minutes. I reclined the seat, set the alarm on my phone, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound. It wasn't strong enough to be a knock, more like something brushing lightly against metal. I opened my eyes, glanced around, but the lot was empty. The sound stopped the moment I looked. I told myself it was probably a tree branch in the wind, though there wasn't a single tree nearby. I shut my eyes again. Then it came again, louder this time, right behind the cab. It sounded like someone dragging their fingers down the metal. I sat up straight, heart thumping hard, and looked into the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him. A man was standing just a few feet behind my trailer, half hidden by the shadows. The light from the restroom flickered across the lot, just enough to outline his shape. He wasn't moving. He was tall, wearing a jacket. I could barely make out the collar and something reflective near his shoulder, like a patch. His face was in shadow, completely still. For a moment, I thought he was another driver stretching his legs, but there was something off. He wasn't smoking, wasn't walking, wasn't doing anything, just standing, staring straight at my truck. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, calling out, "Hey, you good?" No answer. I walked around to the back of the truck, shining the beam under the trailer and around the lot. Nobody was there. My breath came out in white clouds in the cold air. I felt ridiculous. Maybe I'd imagined him, maybe I'd drifted half asleep. I walked a few more steps toward the restroom building, looked around. Empty. I checked between the rigs. Nothing. I went back inside, locked the doors, and sat for a moment. That's when I noticed the smell, faint, metallic, like rust or old blood. It wasn't coming from the air vents. It was from the back of the cab. I turned around but saw nothing. When I looked into the mirror again, he was there again. Same spot. Same jacket. Standing completely still behind my trailer. I froze, unable to breathe. He hadn't made a sound approaching, and I hadn't looked away long enough for anyone to sneak up. I reached for my phone to call 911, but my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I blinked, and he was gone. Just like that. Now I was terrified. I turned the key and started the truck, headlights flooding the asphalt. The place where he'd stood was empty. I put it in gear, ready to leave, when I heard 3 loud bangs on the side of the trailer. Not random, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I floored it. As I pulled onto the highway, adrenaline still racing, I kept glancing at the mirrors. Every time, I expected to see that same figure standing on the shoulder. The road stretched out black and endless. My radio was off, but I swear I could hear faint static, like a whisper through the speakers. I didn't stop until I reached the next major truck stop an hour away. There, I parked right under the lights. A couple of other drivers were talking near the pumps, and I went over, trying to act calm. I asked one if he'd ever stopped back near exit 312. He gave me a strange look and said, "That old one? Nobody parks there after dark." I asked why. He said, "Couple years ago, a driver got killed there. Pulled over around 3 a.m., same spot you're talking about. They found him behind his truck, like he was trying to get something from the trailer. Whoever did it was never caught." I felt the blood drain from my face. Was he wearing a jacket? Like a trucker's coat with a patch? The man nodded slowly. "Yeah." Said his name was Travis something. Used to run these routes all the time. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept checking my mirrors every few minutes. Nothing. The next day, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe stress, exhaustion, imagination, that's what I told myself. But later, when I stopped at a service station in Iowa to refuel, I noticed something in the back of my truck. It was an old jacket. Faded blue, caked with dust, with a reflective patch on the shoulder. I didn't own it. I didn't even know how it got there. Inside the pocket, there was a name stitched into the lining, T. Hall. That night I searched the name online. I found a local news story from 2018, truck driver Travis Hall found dead near rest stop off I-80, apparent homicide. No suspect identified. The photo showed him wearing the exact same jacket. I didn't go back on the road for a week after that. But truckers don't have the luxury to stay scared forever. A few days later, I was back behind the wheel, same route, same highway. I told myself it was just an awful coincidence, maybe someone's old jacket left in a forgotten trailer. But then one night, about 2 weeks later, I was driving through Nebraska again. My CB radio crackled to life, no voice, just static, and then, faintly, a whisper. "You saw me." The voice was slow, breathy, distorted, but human. I turned off the radio, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was interference. But as I looked into the rearview mirror, for half a second, I saw that same shape again, tall, still, standing in the red glow of my taillights, miles behind me on the empty road. I blinked, and it was gone. I never reported any of this. Who would believe me? But sometimes, on long drives, when I stop for the night and check the mirrors before turning in, I still half expect to see him standing there. And every once in a while, when I park and walk around the truck, I swear I can smell that same metallic scent in the cold air. I've learned something since that night. Truck stops hold more than just tired drivers and coffee machines. Some hold what's left of those who never got to finish their route. Now, I always keep my mirrors tilted slightly down. I don't want to see who might be standing there again. The end. The locked bathroom stall. It happened in December of 2019, on a long stretch of Interstate 5 between Oregon and Northern California. I was driving home for the holidays after finishing a week of overnight shifts at a logistics warehouse in Portland. It was around 1:45 a.m., freezing cold, fog rolling low across the road. The kind of night when headlights barely cut through the mist. I'd been driving for almost 6 hours when I saw the glowing sign for a rest stop near Dunsmuir, California. It wasn't big, just a restroom building, a handful of vending machines, and maybe 4 parking spots for cars and 2 for trucks. I pulled in mostly because I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. The lot was empty except for one SUV parked at the far end, engine off, no lights. The fluorescent bulbs above the restrooms flickered weakly, humming like a dying radio. I remember the air being so quiet I could hear the crunch of gravel under my shoes when I stepped out. The cold hit instantly, sharp, dry, biting. I grabbed my jacket from the back seat and locked the car out of habit. The restrooms were in a small brick building with men's on the left and women's on the right. I pushed open the door to the women's room, and the metal hinges gave a long, screeching groan. Inside, the light buzzed faintly, one of the ceiling tubes strobing every few seconds. There were 4 stalls, all closed except the second one. I went into the open stall, hung my bag on the hook, and sat there for a moment just trying to breathe. The silence was thick, almost heavy. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of crying. It came from the last stall. At first I thought I was imagining it. It was so soft I couldn't tell if it was real, just a thin, shaky sobbing, like someone trying hard not to be heard. I froze, listening. The crying went on, slow and rhythmic. "Hello?" I said quietly. "Are you okay?" No answer. The crying stopped completely. The air felt suddenly colder, heavier. I waited for a moment, then spoke again, louder this time. "Hey, do you need help?" Still nothing. I stood up and looked under the stalls. From where I was, I could see shoes, bare feet, actually, small, pale and still, standing just a few inches from the floor inside the lock stall at the end. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice shaking. The feet didn't move. I stepped out of my stall and went closer. The door to the last stall was shut tight, locked from the inside. I knocked gently. "Hey, I'm going to get someone to help you, okay?" The second I said that, the crying started again, louder this time, almost a wail. But there was something wrong about it. It didn't sound like pain or fear, it sounded like imitation. Like someone trying to copy what crying should sound like, but missing something human in it. I ran out of the restroom, heart racing. The fog outside was so thick I couldn't see my car clearly. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. I stood there, shaking, looking around. The SUV on the far side was still parked there, no movement, no lights. I decided to get back in my car and drive to the next town for help. But as I turned, I noticed something. The restroom light had gone completely still. No flicker. Just steady light now. I don't know why, but it made me stop. Maybe part of me didn't want to leave someone behind who might actually need help. So I went back inside. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. The smell of wet concrete and cleaning solution was stronger now. I took a few slow steps forward and saw that the door to the last stall was still closed. The crying had stopped again. "Listen, I'm going to open the door, okay?" I said, more for myself than for whoever was in there. I bent down to look under the door again. The feet were gone. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly stood back up. That's when the lock on the stall clicked. One slow, heavy sound, like metal turning itself. The door creaked open about 2 inches. I couldn't see inside, just darkness. "Hello?" I whispered. Something moved inside. I saw a faint reflection of eyes, just a glimmer in the dark, like someone standing too far back to be visible. I stumbled backward, slammed into the opposite stall, and bolted out of the restroom as fast as I could. I sprinted to my car, fumbling the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them twice before unlocking the door. As soon as I got inside, I locked every door and started the engine. My headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the front of the restroom building. That's when I saw it. The restroom door was swinging slowly open. No one came out. The door just kept swaying, back and forth, until it finally stopped, wide open. I left. I drove 30 miles to the next gas station in Mount Shasta, where I found 2 state troopers parked outside. I ran up to them, still shaking, and told them what had happened. They looked at each other, skeptical but concerned. One of them agreed to follow me back to the rest stop. When we arrived, the fog had started to lift. The parking lot looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, almost harmless. The trooper went inside while I waited by the car, too scared to follow. A minute later, he came back out, his expression unreadable. "There's no one in there," he said. "All the stalls are empty." "I swear, I saw someone," I said, my voice cracking. "There were feet under the door. I heard crying." He nodded slowly, then motioned me to follow him back inside. I didn't want to, but I forced myself. The restroom was quiet again, the lights humming normally. And then I saw it. On the floor of the last stall, where the crying had come from, were wet footprints. Small, barefoot, leading from the toilet to the wall, and stopping right at the base of it. There was no vent, no hole, no broken tile. Just a clean concrete wall. The officer crouched down, ran his fingers across the wet marks, and looked up at me. "You didn't step in there?" "No," I said quietly. He stood up, brushed his hands off, and said, "Well, you're not the first person to call about something strange here. Locals say a little girl went missing off this stretch of highway in '96. Her mom stopped here during a snowstorm. The kid went to the restroom and never came out. They searched the woods for weeks. Nothing." I couldn't say anything. I just stared at the wall where the footprints ended. The officer took my information, told me to get some rest, and left. I sat in my car for a while, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence, some trick of moisture or reflection. But as I started the engine, I looked at the restroom one last time. The door was swinging again. Not fast, just slowly, rhythmically. And I swear I heard a faint sound, carried on the wind through the fog. A child's voice, whispering, "Don't leave me here." I slammed the gas pedal and didn't stop until I reached Reading. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the missing child case from 1996. There it was, Amber Johnson, age 7, last seen at a rest stop near Dunsmuir, wearing light blue pajamas. The same rest stop. Since that night, I've driven through California dozens of times, but I always take the long route around. Truckers still talk about that stop, the one where the lights flicker and the crying never sounds quite right. I've never gone back. But sometimes, when I stop at another rest area in the middle of the night, I'll hear faint crying through the restroom walls. And I always wonder if she's still waiting for her mother to come back. The end. The truck that followed me. It happened in late August of 2022, on a desolate stretch of Highway 93 in Nevada. I was hauling a load of building supplies from Las Vegas to Twin Falls, Idaho, about a 10-hour drive. The sun had set hours ago, and the road had turned into an endless ribbon of darkness through the desert. The nearest town was more than 40 miles away. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the black and the dull orange glow of my dashboard. I've been driving trucks for nearly 15 years, and I've seen all kinds of strange things on the road, car wrecks, wild animals, weird people at rest stops, but nothing ever felt as wrong as that night. It started around midnight, when I first noticed the pickup truck. It was old, maybe a late 80s Ford or Chevy, with dull red paint and no visible plates. It came out of nowhere. One moment the road behind me was empty, and the next, I could see its headlights in my mirrors, following too close. I kept waiting for it to pass, but it stayed right behind me, maintaining the exact same distance no matter how I sped up or slowed down. At first, I thought it was just another driver keeping pace, maybe another long hauler trying to stay awake. But after 30 minutes of the same distance, no change, no turn-offs, I started to feel uneasy. There were no gas stations, no houses, no exits, just a narrow 2-lane highway stretching into nowhere. I flicked my right blinker and moved onto the shoulder, letting my truck slow down gradually. The red pickup slowed too. I stopped completely. Its headlights dimmed, then turned off. The desert around us was silent. No sound but the low hum of my idling engine and the faint wind brushing against the trailer. I waited, staring into my mirror. Nothing moved. After about 20 seconds, I decided I wasn't going to sit there and find out what this guy wanted. I put it in gear and pulled back onto the road. The instant I did, the red pickup's headlights came back on. It pulled out behind me. I tried telling myself it was just coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. Every instinct told me something was wrong. I turned on my radio to distract myself, but the signal was mostly static out there. Only one channel came through clearly, some distant AM station playing an old country song from the 70s. For some reason, the loneliness of that sound made everything feel worse. After another half hour, the truck was still there. Always the same distance. No honks, no flashes of light, no attempt to pass. Just there. Following. Around 1:30 a.m., I saw a blue sign for a rest area 2 miles ahead. Finally, a chance to pull in and maybe find someone else there, another driver, a security guard, anyone. As I slowed and took the exit, I checked the mirrors again. The red truck followed me off the main road. The rest area was tiny, just a looped road, a restroom building, 2 vending machines, and maybe half a dozen parking spaces. The place was empty. I parked my rig near the edge of the lot under a flickering light. The pickup pulled in too, stopping at the far end. Its headlights turned off again. I sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel, watching. I couldn't see anyone inside the truck from this distance. The windshield was just black glass reflecting the light. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and shouted, "You need something?" My voice echoed across the empty lot. No reply. I started walking toward it, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Hey! You alright?" Halfway there, I stopped. The driver's side door opened slowly. A tall man stepped out, wearing jeans and a jacket. He stood there for a second, then stepped around to the front of his truck, staying half hidden by the shadows. "You've been following me for an hour," I said. "If you've got a problem, say it." "Nothing." He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, his head tilted slightly to the side, like he was studying me. Then he took one step forward, slow, deliberate, and I swear I could hear the crunch of gravel even from that distance. Something in me snapped. I turned, ran back to my truck, and climbed inside. The second I locked the door, his headlights turned back on, blinding white. The engine of the pickup roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas and tore out of that rest stop. When I hit the highway again, I looked in the mirror. The pickup followed, full speed, headlights glaring like twin suns in the dark. He stayed behind me for miles. Every time I hit 90, he hit 90. Every time I slowed for a curve, he matched it perfectly. There were no other cars, no exits, nowhere to go. Just the endless desert. I tried calling 911, but the signal dropped before the call went through. I was completely alone. After nearly 20 minutes of this, I noticed something strange. His headlights began to flicker, not in a mechanical way, but like someone was turning them off and on rhythmically. 2 short flashes, then 1 long. Over and over. It almost looked like Morse code. I had no idea what it meant, and I wasn't about to slow down to find out. Suddenly, the lights disappeared completely. I looked in my mirrors, the pickup was gone. Just gone. I kept driving for another 10 miles, my heart still hammering. Then I saw something that made every hair on my body stand up. Up ahead, on the right side of the road, just beyond the guardrail, were fresh skid marks, long, black, curving lines that led straight off the edge and down into the desert. I slowed down, looked over, and saw the twisted wreck of a red pickup truck. It was old, rusted, half buried in sand, like it had been there for years. The cab was crushed, the roof caved in. No movement inside. No lights. I stopped for just a moment, staring. Then I noticed something else. There were no fresh tire tracks leading to the crash. The sand around it was untouched, smooth as glass. I felt dizzy, like my brain was trying to process 2 impossible things at once. The truck I'd seen following me, it couldn't have been that wreck. That wreck had been there for years. But I had just seen it driving behind me minutes ago. I forced myself to drive on. I didn't stop again until I reached Eerie, Nevada, around 4 a.m. I parked under the lights of a small diner and went inside, shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, asked if I was okay. I told her what had happened. She stared at me for a long time before speaking. "Red pickup?" "Yeah," I said. "Old one. No plates." She nodded slowly. "You're not the first. That stretch of 93's cursed, they say. A trucker named Clyde died out there back in 92. Fell asleep at the wheel, went off the road, burned alive in his pickup. Folks around here still see his truck chasing them in the dark. Sometimes it disappears when they get close to Eerie." I wanted to laugh, say she was crazy. But then she added, "My brother saw it once. Same way you did. Said the driver didn't have a face." I left the diner as dawn broke, trying to convince myself I'd just been tired, seeing things. But later, when I stopped to refuel near Twin Falls, I checked the back of my trailer. On the dusty door, drawn with a finger, were 3 words. "Keep your eyes open." The letters were shaky, uneven, traced through the dirt like someone had written them while the truck was moving. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those flickering headlights behind me, flashing in that strange pattern. A week later, when I passed through Nevada again, I took a different route, longer, less direct, but safer. Still, somewhere deep down, I knew I'd never truly escape that road. Because now, every time I drive through the desert at night, I find myself checking the mirrors too often. And sometimes, when the radio turns to static and the wind gets too quiet, I think I see a faint glow in the distance behind me, 2 small points of light, perfectly steady, keeping pace no matter how fast I go. Maybe it's just another driver. Maybe it's nothing at all. But I know better. The end. The cry from the woods. It happened in February 2020, somewhere along Route 2 in northern Maine. My girlfriend, Emily, and I were driving back from visiting her parents in Bangor. It was late, around 11:45 p.m., and the snow had started falling heavier than the forecast had said. The road was nearly empty, lined with endless pine trees buried under white. The air outside was cold enough to frost the edges of the windshield, even with the heat blasting. We'd been on the road for hours, and Emily was getting tired. She offered to take a break at the next rest stop so I could nap for a bit. I agreed. There aren't many stops on Route 2, but eventually we saw a sign, "Public Rest Area, 2 miles ahead." When we pulled in, there were no other cars. Just a small parking lot covered in thin snow, 2 wooden benches, a single dim lamp, and the black outline of trees beyond the guardrail. It felt completely isolated, no sound except for the soft hiss of the wind through the pines. We parked close to the light. Emily leaned her seat back and said she'd rest for a few minutes. I turned off the headlights, leaving just the yellowish glow from the lamp outside. For a while, everything was quiet. I closed my eyes. That's when we heard it, faint at first, almost like the sound of an animal in the distance. But then it came again, clearer this time. A child crying. It echoed through the trees, high-pitched, desperate, unmistakably human. Emily sat up instantly. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, straining to listen. The crying came again, this time followed by a small voice, "Help, please." Emily's face went pale. "Oh my God, it's a kid." Without thinking, I got out of the car. The sound was coming from beyond the tree line, maybe 100 feet away. It was dark, but the moonlight reflected faintly off the snow. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped toward the woods. "Wait," Emily said, rolling down her window. "Call someone first." "There's no service," I told her, checking my phone. "Stay in the car. Lock the doors." She hesitated but nodded. I crossed the guardrail and followed the sound into the trees. My boots crunched through the snow, each step sinking deep. The cold bit into my face as the light from the parking lot faded behind me. The crying was steady now, not far ahead. "Hello?" I shouted. "It's okay, I'm coming to help." No response, just another sob. I moved faster, scanning the trees with my flashlight. The beam bounced off branches heavy with snow. The sound seemed to shift, now to my left, then ahead again. It didn't make sense. I kept calling out, but the crying never seemed to get closer. It just echoed, thin and distant, like it was leading me somewhere. After maybe 5 minutes, I stopped, realizing I couldn't see the parking lot lights anymore. Everything around me was dark. My footprints were the only path I could follow back. Then, the crying stopped. The silence hit like a weight. Even the wind had died. My breath was the only sound. "Hello?" I called again. Nothing. I slowly turned in a circle, shining the flashlight through the trees. And that's when I saw it, a small figure standing between 2 pines about 30 feet ahead. It was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what looked like a thin, white coat. Barefoot. "Hey!" I called. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The figure didn't move. The face was in shadow, but I could see that the hair was wet, sticking to the forehead. The head tilted slightly, just enough to make me freeze. I took a cautious step forward. The beam of my flashlight flickered for a second, Just once, and when it came back, the figure was gone. The snow where it had stood was untouched. No footprints. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. I turned to go back, but when I looked behind me, my tracks were already half filled with fresh snow. I hurried toward where I thought the parking lot should be, but the trees all looked the same. The darkness seemed thicker now, like the forest was closing in. Then I heard something else, a whisper, soft and close. Not from ahead, but right beside me. "Don't leave me." I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. No one was there. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping. That's when I saw a shape move between the trees, fast, low to the ground, gone before I could focus on it. My light caught a glimpse of something pale dragging across the snow. I ran. I didn't care which direction, I just ran. Branches scraped my jacket and face. I kept shouting for Emily, hoping I was running the right way. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the yellow glow of the parking lot lamp through the trees. I burst out of the woods, gasping for air, and saw Emily already outside the car, calling my name. "What the hell were you doing?" she yelled, grabbing my arm. I turned to point back at the woods, but the forest was silent again. No crying. No movement. I tried to explain, but before I could, we both froze. From somewhere deep in the woods, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of that same child's voice. "Help me." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "We need to go." We jumped in the car and tore out of there, wheels spinning on the snow. I didn't slow down until we hit the main highway again. For miles, neither of us said a word. When we reached a gas station near Lincoln, we told the clerk what happened. He looked at us like he'd heard it all before. "That old rest stop," he said. "You're not the first to hear that. Every few winters someone stops there, says they hear a kid crying in the woods. State police even searched once, found nothing." "Was there ever a missing kid?" Emily asked. The man nodded slowly. "Back in the 80s. Little boy wandered away from his family when their car broke down near there during a blizzard. They never found him. Some say he froze to death in the woods. Others say he's still looking for his mom." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice again. The tone wasn't just sadness, it was something else. Like anger. A few days later, I checked the dash cam footage from the car. At first, it was just darkness and snow. But near the end, when I ran back from the woods, the camera caught a reflection in the side mirror. A pale face, pressed up against the glass of the back window, watching me. I froze the frame and stared at it for a long time. The features were blurry, but I could see the outline of a child's face, eyes wide open, mouth slightly parted as if whispering. That was the last time I ever took Route 2 at night. 2 years later, in 2022, I was driving through Maine again for work. Out of morbid curiosity, I searched the location on my phone. That rest stop doesn't exist anymore. The state closed it down permanently, citing erosion and maintenance issues. But satellite images still show the empty lot and the same tree line. People on local forums say that if you drive by late at night with your windows down, you can still hear someone calling for help from the woods. Sometimes it's faint, sometimes it sounds right next to your car. They say if you stop, you might see small footprints in the snow leading into the trees, but never coming back out. I believe it. I still have the dashcam image saved on my computer, though I try not to look at it. Every time I do, I notice something new, the faint outline of a hand pressed against the glass, just below the face. The fingers are long and thin, almost transparent, like frost forming a shape. I tell myself it's just a trick of light, a glitch in the camera. But deep down, I know what I heard that night was real. The cry wasn't asking for help. It was calling me in. The end. The restroom handprint. It happened in October 2021, on a stretch of Interstate 70 somewhere between Kansas and Colorado. I was driving alone that night, hauling a shipment of industrial tools. I'd left St. Louis early that morning, and by the time I reached the flat, empty middle of Kansas, the sun was long gone. The air outside was cold, dry, and silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start to imagine sounds that aren't there. It was close to 1 a.m. when I pulled into a rest area near Salina. I'd been driving too long, and my eyes were burning. The rest stop looked small, a handful of vending machines, a row of lamps throwing weak yellow light across the cracked asphalt, and a single brick restroom building standing slightly crooked from age. There were no other vehicles. Not a single car, not a single truck. Just me, the hum of my idling rig, and the faint buzz of the lights overhead. I parked close to the building, grabbed my thermos, and decided to stretch my legs. The moment I stepped out of the truck, the cold hit me like a slap. The air smelled faintly of dust and iron. I don't know why, but the place felt wrong, like the world around it had stopped moving. Even the wind wasn't blowing. Inside the restroom, the lights flickered with a slow, rhythmic hum. The air was damp, smelling of bleach and rust. 3 urinals, 2 sinks, and 3 stalls. The tiles were cracked, and someone had carved a name into the metal of the first stall door, Tom. I washed my hands, splashed water on my face, and glanced at the mirror. That's when I saw it, a red handprint. It was faint, smeared, high up on the glass, like someone had pressed their palm flat against it and dragged downward. My first thought was that it was some kind of vandalism or paint, but it looked fresh. Wet. I reached out, hesitated, then wiped across it with a paper towel. The towel came away clean. There was nothing on the glass. I stepped back, confused. The handprint was still there, clear as ever, but from the side, there was nothing. Only when I looked straight at the mirror did it appear. I laughed nervously, told myself I was just tired. I turned toward the door to leave, but stopped dead when I noticed something on the floor. Another handprint. This one on the tile, near the last stall, a dark, rusty red stain, shaped perfectly like a palm pressed into the ground. That metallic smell in the air suddenly seemed stronger. I crouched down, shining my flashlight on it. It wasn't paint. It looked too real. Too textured. I stood quickly and pushed open the last stall. The door creaked on its hinges, echoing against the tiles. Empty. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the back of the door, in large smudged strokes, were more handprints, overlapping, layered, as if someone had been pounding against it with bloody palms, trying to get out. I stepped back, my chest tight. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it had to be a prank, some kind of graffiti done with fake blood. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I turned to leave again, but as I reached for the door handle, I noticed something in the mirror. Behind me, just for a second, I saw a figure. It was standing near the last stall, motionless. A tall man, or what looked like one, shoulders slumped forward, head tilted. His arms hung unnaturally long. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the air, and there was nothing there. The mirror was empty now too. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the restroom and back toward my truck. My boots slammed against the pavement, echoing across the empty lot. I climbed in, slammed the door shut, and locked it. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the restroom building under the flickering light. That's when I saw it again. The red handprint. But this time, it was on my windshield. Right in front of me. I froze. It hadn't been there when I got in. The mark was identical to the one from the mirror, same size, same smudge. I grabbed a rag from the passenger seat, stepped halfway out, and tried to wipe it away. But the glass was clean. Nothing came off. The mark stayed. I got back in, locked the doors again, and started the engine. My headlights flared to life, illuminating the building. For just a second, through the restroom doorway, I thought I saw movement, a flash of something pale and quick, retreating into the darkness inside. That was enough. I threw the truck into gear and got back on the highway, heart hammering, trying to focus on the road ahead. The red handprint on the windshield seemed to fade as I drove, until I could barely see it anymore. After about 40 minutes, I reached a truck stop near the Colorado border. There were other drivers there, lights, voices, normal life. I parked, still shaken, and went inside for coffee. The clerk noticed how pale I looked and asked if I was okay. I told him about the rest stop, the mirror, the handprint, the smell. He frowned. That old rest area near Salina? Yeah, I said. He nodded slowly. They should have shut that place down years ago. You probably don't know the story. I didn't answer, just waited. Guy got murdered there in 2009, the clerk said quietly. Truck driver, same as you. Pulled over to use the restroom in the middle of the night. Another driver found him in the morning, beaten to death. They said he tried to defend himself. Whole stall covered in blood. They cleaned it up, but he trailed off. But what? I asked. He shrugged. They never caught who did it. Some folks say you can still smell the iron in the air when you walk in there. Others say the mirrors fog up with handprints that don't belong to you. I didn't finish my coffee. The next morning, in daylight, I went to wash my truck. I figured I'd finally get rid of the stain once and for all. But when I looked at the windshield, there was nothing there. No smudge. No mark. I felt stupid for letting it get to me. I told myself it was all exhaustion and suggestion. The power of the mind. That night, I drove again, same route, same direction. But as I was passing through Kansas City, I checked my mirrors, and froze. On the rear window of the trailer, illuminated faintly by the red glow of my taillights, was a single, perfect handprint. Not outside, inside. I pulled over immediately, my pulse pounding. I jumped out, grabbed a crowbar, and opened the trailer. It was empty. Completely empty. But the air was cold. Colder than outside. And there, on the inside of the back door, smeared faintly into the metal, was that same mark, red, wide-fingered, sliding downward. I backed away slowly and closed the doors. I didn't open that trailer again until I delivered it the next day. A week later, I heard from another driver who'd stopped at that same rest area. He'd gone in just after midnight. Said the lights were out completely. He used his phone flashlight. When he looked in the mirror, he saw two handprints appear right beside his reflection, both on the glass, both wet, even though the air inside was bone dry. He said he got out of there before finishing. Since then, I've avoided that stretch of highway completely. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I'll notice condensation forming on the inside of the windshield, even when the heat's on. And when I wipe it away, I swear I see the faint outline of a hand. A wide palm, fingers stretched, as if someone's pressing from the other side of the glass. I don't stop anymore. I don't pull over at empty rest areas. Because whatever left that mark that night, it's still following me. And it's looking for another mirror. The end. The Silent Woman by the Vending Machine. It happened in March of 2023, somewhere along Interstate 40 in New Mexico. I was driving back from Flagstaff after delivering a load of auto parts. It was just past 2:30 a.m., the sky moonless, the desert around me flat and endless. The only lights came from the truck's high beams and the occasional reflector flashing past in the dark. I was alone on the highway, the CB radio dead silent, my coffee long gone cold. I'd been driving since early evening and needed to stretch my legs, so when I saw a green sign that read rest area, 1 mile, I decided to pull over. There was nothing else around, no towns, no gas stations, not even another set of headlights in the rearview mirror. Just miles of nothing. When I pulled into the rest stop, it looked small and old, maybe built in the 70s. A single restroom building stood at the far end, lit by two buzzing lamps that cast a sickly yellow light. A vending machine sat beside the entrance, the kind that sold coffee and snacks. The parking lot was empty. I parked under the light and shut off the engine. For a moment, the silence was overwhelming. Not even crickets. Just the low hum of the vending machine in the distance and the soft creak of metal cooling on my truck. I got out, grabbed my thermos, and walked toward the vending machine. The air smelled faintly of dust and ozone from the coming rain. My boots echoed against the concrete as I approached. That's when I saw her. A woman was standing next to the vending machine. She wore a long white coat that looked too thin for the weather. Her hair was dark, straight, hanging loose past her shoulders. She stood perfectly still, facing the machine but not moving, not pressing buttons, not even reaching for anything. Just standing there, looking at it. I slowed down, hesitated. Maybe she was another traveler. But the closer I got, the stranger it felt. There was something off about how she stood, too still, too rigid. Her hands hung by her sides, fingers slightly curled. "Evening," I said quietly, stopping a few feet away. She didn't respond. "Machine working?" I tried again. Still nothing. Her face was turned just enough that I could see part of her profile. Her skin was pale, unnaturally pale under the yellow light. I couldn't see her eyes, but I noticed something odd. The glass of the vending machine reflected her faintly, and in that reflection, her mouth seemed to be moving. Very slowly. But she wasn't making a sound. The hair on my arms stood up. I took a step back. "You okay, ma'am?" No answer. I turned, pretending to look at my truck for a second, then glanced back. She was gone. Just gone. The space beside the machine was empty. I felt my throat tighten. There was nowhere she could have gone that fast. The lot was open, no trees, no cover. I walked around the corner of the building, shining my flashlight, nothing. The air was completely still. I went inside the restroom, mostly just to get under a roof and breathe. The lights inside flickered, humming faintly. When I looked in the mirror over the sink, I almost dropped my flashlight. The woman was standing behind me in the reflection. She was right outside the restroom door, facing me through the glass window. Her eyes were dark, no light reflecting in them. Her head tilted slightly to the side, her lips moving again, forming silent words I couldn't hear. I spun around. The door's small window was empty. I stood frozen, staring at the glass, heart hammering in my chest. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone from there too. I didn't wash my hands. I bolted out of the restroom, nearly tripping on the steps, and ran straight to my truck. The vending machine hummed quietly behind me, its lights flickering. I climbed inside, slammed the door, and locked it. For a few seconds, I just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the vending machine through the windshield. Then, suddenly, the machine clicked and whirred, like someone had pressed a button. A paper cup dropped into the slot, and the machine began to pour coffee. But no one was there. I stared, frozen. Steam rose slowly from the cup, curling in the cold air. Then the cup tipped over on its own and rolled off the tray, spilling dark liquid across the pavement. That was enough. I started the engine and pulled out fast, tires crunching against gravel. As I hit the highway, I glanced in the mirror, just to make sure I was clear. The woman was standing at the edge of the lot, facing the road. Her coat glowed faintly in the headlights. She didn't move. Didn't wave. Just stood there, watching as I drove away. I didn't stop until I reached Albuquerque 3 hours later. I parked at a busy truck stop, surrounded by other rigs, and tried to shake it off. Maybe exhaustion had gotten to me. Maybe I dozed off for a second, imagined it all. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The next morning, I mentioned it to another driver at the diner counter. He stopped eating and looked at me carefully. "White coat?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "By a vending machine." Didn't talk. Didn't move. He sighed. "You saw her too." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer. "That rest stop's been closed on and off for years. But people still pull in by mistake. They see her. Always the same story, woman by the vending machine, pale skin, dark hair, never speaks. My cousin swore he saw her last winter. Said she was standing by the machine, staring at her own reflection. When he looked again, she wasn't there. When he went to his truck, the passenger door was open. And his coffee was sitting in the cup holder, still hot. I didn't touch my food after that. Later that week, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up anything I could find about that rest stop. There wasn't much, just a few forum posts from truckers and travelers. One said the place had been the site of a murder in 1985. A young woman traveling alone had pulled in to get coffee. Another driver found her hours later behind the vending machine, strangled. Her coat had been white. Police never caught who did it. They said she tried to fight back, her fingerprints were found on the glass. After reading that, I deleted the search history and tried not to think about it again. But sometimes, late at night, when I pull into other rest stops, I still think about her. Once, about a month after that night, I was parked at a rest area in Texas. It was 3 a.m., raining hard, and I went to get a soda from the vending machine outside the restroom. As I pressed the button, the machine flickered, and for a split second, in the reflection of the glass, I saw her face. Pale. Still. Eyes fixed on me. The can dropped, startling me so hard I almost screamed. When I looked again, she was gone. That was the last time I ever used a vending machine at night. But the strangest part came weeks later, when I got my truck washed. The guy doing the detailing called me over, frowning. "You spill coffee or something on your passenger door?" he asked. I walked over and froze. There was a streak of dark brown liquid on the inside of the door, trailing down from the handle, as if someone had rested a dripping cup there. I hadn't touched coffee since that night. I told him to leave it. Just clean around it. Because for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to wipe it away. Every driver on the road has stories, the kind we tell to pass the time, the kind that sound like rumors. But I know what I saw. She wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. She was real. And she wasn't just standing there, she was waiting. Sometimes I still see her in my dreams, standing beside that vending machine, lips moving silently, over and over. And every time I wake up, I can still smell burnt coffee. The end. The radio interference. It happened in November of 2020, somewhere along Interstate 90 in South Dakota. I was driving cross-country from Chicago to Seattle, hauling a shipment of refrigerated goods. It was just past 2:15 a.m. when exhaustion began to creep in. The road ahead was pitch black, the landscape flat and empty. Every few miles, a faint green highway sign would flash by, but otherwise, it felt like I was driving through an ocean of darkness. That night, the weather was clear but bitterly cold. The temperature gauge read 19 degrees Fahrenheit, and my heater was barely keeping up. I remember thinking how eerie it felt to be so alone, no cars, no trucks, just the hum of the engine and the faint static from the CB radio. I hadn't planned on stopping, but when I saw a blue sign for a rest area ahead, I decided I needed a break. I'd been fighting sleep for over an hour, and my eyelids were starting to droop. The sign read Rest Area 3 miles, exit 224. When I pulled in, the place was deserted. The lamps along the lot were dim, flickering occasionally like dying candles. A single maintenance truck was parked near the exit, but it looked abandoned, no driver inside, no lights. I parked my rig beneath one of the lamps, killed the engine, and let the silence settle. I checked my phone. No service. The battery icon blinked red, 3% left. I decided to nap for a bit, just enough to recharge. I leaned back in the seat, pulled my jacket over me, and closed my eyes. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, everything outside looked different. The fog had rolled in thick, coating the windows in a hazy film. I sat up, blinking, and checked the time. 3:07 a.m. That's when the radio turned on by itself. At first, it was just faint static, like the kind of interference you get when you drive too far from civilization. I reached over to shut it off, thinking I might have brushed against the dial in my sleep. But before I could, the static changed. A voice came through, distorted, low, breaking apart between bursts of white noise. "Get out." I froze, staring at the radio. The words were faint but unmistakable. A man's voice, hollow and strained, as if coming from far away. I turned the dial, scanning through stations, but every frequency was the same, static. Then the voice came again, louder this time. "Get out, now." The tone wasn't angry. It sounded urgent, pleading. I switched off the radio completely. The cab went silent. My pulse hammered in my ears. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the wind whistle faintly against the trailer. And then, something banged against the side of my truck. 3 slow, heavy knocks, metal against metal. I jumped, grabbed the flashlight from the dash, and turned it on. The beam cut through the fog outside, but I couldn't see anyone. I opened the door cautiously, shining the light around. The fog was thick, swirling like smoke, making it hard to see more than 20 feet. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the air. No answer. I walked around the truck, light sweeping across the tires, the trailer doors, the pavement. Everything was still. No footprints, no movement. The only sound was the wind, blowing softly through the empty rest area. I told myself maybe it was the trailer shifting in the cold. Metal contracts, makes noise. I climbed back inside, locked the doors, and turned the radio back on, mostly just for comfort, to fill the silence. The static was gone. Instead, there was soft music playing, an old piano melody, something slow and sorrowful. It sounded like it was coming from another century. The digital display on the radio, which normally showed the frequency, was blank. Just a black rectangle. "Hello?" I said quietly, feeling ridiculous for talking to a radio. The music stopped. Then, in the same broken voice as before, the man whispered, "He's here." The radio cut to static again, loud and sharp. I twisted the dial, trying to shut it off, but the buttons weren't responding. The screen flickered, numbers flashing randomly, like the system was glitching. Then came the sound of breathing. Slow, shallow, uneven. It wasn't mine. I looked up at the windshield and felt every muscle in my body lock. There, through the fog and faintly reflected in the glass, was a silhouette. Someone was standing just outside the truck, directly in front of the hood. I couldn't see their face, just the shape, tall, motionless, shoulders hunched forward slightly. I leaned over and hit the horn. The sound blared, echoing through the night, but the figure didn't move. I hit the headlights. The beams cut through the fog, and the figure was gone. I threw the truck into gear and floored it, tires screeching on the damp pavement. As I sped back onto the highway, the radio went silent again. I drove for nearly 20 minutes without looking in the mirrors once. When I finally reached the next rest stop, a much larger one near Chamberlain, I pulled in under bright lights and parked between 2 other rigs. There were people inside the building, vending machines humming, the smell of coffee and cleaning fluid. It felt safe again. I sat there, breathing, trying to calm down. My radio was still on, now silent and working normally. The digital display showed 99.1 FM. The same frequency I'd been on before. Out of curiosity, or stupidity, I googled 99.1 South Dakota radio. The first result that came up made my stomach drop. It said the station had been off air since 2015. I told myself it must have been interference, maybe a different station sharing the frequency. But something in me knew better. That voice hadn't been a broadcast. I went inside the rest stop, ordered coffee from the machine, and told another driver what had happened. He listened quietly, nodding slowly. "You were at the one near exit 224, he asked. "Yeah," I said. He sighed. "That place is bad news. Happened back in 2002, truck exploded there, propane leak or something. Killed the driver inside. Locals say he tried to call for help over the CB before it went up. People still pick up his voice sometimes on the radio around that stretch. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, but he didn't. He just stirred his coffee and said, "They say he warns people before something bad happens." I didn't respond. I finished my drink and went back to the truck. Everything looked normal again. Until I noticed something on the dashboard. A thin line of soot, right above the radio vents, as if someone had dragged a dirty finger across it. I wiped it away with a napkin, but the smell lingered, burnt plastic, faint but unmistakable. That night, I didn't drive another mile. 2 days later, on my way back through South Dakota, I heard about a storm system hitting that exact stretch of highway. Heavy winds, ice, multiple accidents. One of the wrecks happened at exit 224. A semi lost control, flipped, and caught fire. The driver didn't make it. The timestamp on the news photo said 3:09 a.m. Exactly 2 minutes after the voice on my radio told me to get out. Since then, I've kept the radio volume low when I drive at night. I tell myself the interference was just coincidence. A glitch. But sometimes, when I pass through long empty stretches of road, I'll hear faint static again, even when the radio's turned off. Once, near Wyoming, I swear I heard that same piano music, playing for just a few seconds before it vanished. Maybe it's just the hum of the road, maybe it's in my head. But every time it happens, I can't shake the feeling that it's him, still trying to warn someone before it's too late. And now, whenever I stop at night, I listen closely to the silence around me. Because if the radio ever whispers again, I'm not waiting to find out what comes next. The end. The Stranger Who Knocked. It happened in September 2021, on Highway 50 in Utah, the stretch locals call the loneliest road in America. I was driving home from Reno after delivering a load of farm equipment, planning to make it as far as Delta before stopping for the night. The sun had gone down hours ago, leaving only the pale silver glow of the moon and the endless black line of asphalt cutting through the desert. I'd been driving for nearly 10 hours straight. The highway was empty, not a single car behind or ahead of me for miles. The CB radio was dead, no cell signal, and the only sound was the low hum of the engine. At some point past midnight, I decided to stop at a rest area to stretch my legs. I didn't remember seeing one on the map, but a faded green sign appeared ahead, "Public Rest Stop, 1 mile." When I pulled in, I could tell the place hadn't been maintained in years. The pavement was cracked, the lights dim and buzzing. The single restroom building sat at the far end of the lot, half of its windows boarded up. Weeds pushed through the cracks near the vending machines. There wasn't another vehicle in sight. I parked under the only working light, left the engine idling, and got out. The air was cold and dry, the kind that makes every sound sharper. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward the restroom. Inside, the smell of old water and mildew hit me. The tile floor was chipped, and graffiti covered the walls. After washing my hands, I turned off the faucet and listened. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard someone whispering outside. It was faint, a single voice, low and drawn out. I froze, holding my breath. The whisper stopped. I told myself it was the wind moving through the cracks in the building. When I stepped back outside, I saw movement near my truck. A figure, a man, standing by the passenger side door. He was tall and thin, his clothes dark, the outline of his body faint against the pale glow of the lights. "Hey!" I called out. He didn't move. I started walking toward him, flashlight in hand. "You need something?" The man stepped back slowly, into the shadows between two parked picnic benches. I stopped, shining the beam toward him. His face was pale, but I couldn't make out his features clearly. His head was tilted slightly downward, like he was watching me from beneath his brow. "You okay, buddy?" I asked again. That's when he smiled. Just barely, the corner of his mouth curling upward in a way that didn't look right. Then he whispered, "Can you help me?" His voice was dry, almost hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. "Where's your car?" I asked. "You alone out here?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, head still bowed, breathing slowly. Then he repeated, "Can you help me?" Something about the tone made my stomach twist. It wasn't a plea, it was almost rehearsed. I took another step back toward my truck. "What do you need help with?" The man tilted his head to the other side, same slow movement, same blank stare. "It's cold," he said softly. "Let me in your truck." I shook my head. "Sorry, man. Can't do that. I'll call someone for you." He didn't move, didn't even blink. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, he said, "You already did." A chill went through me. I turned and walked quickly back toward the truck. My keys were still in the ignition. When I reached for the door handle, there was a soft knock. I froze. The sound came from the passenger side window. I turned my head slowly, and there he was. The man stood inches from the glass, staring straight at me. His face was pale and stretched thin, his eyes completely black in the reflection of the light. His lips moved again, forming the same words, "Can you help me?" I jumped into the cab, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands shook as I reached for the ignition, but the truck was already running. I hit the headlights. The man wasn't there anymore. I shifted into gear and sped out of the rest area, gravel spitting from the tires. For a few miles, I didn't look back. I just drove. Then, against my better judgment, I glanced into the rearview mirror. Someone was standing in the middle of the lot, illuminated by my taillights. It was him. He was still facing the road, watching me drive away. I didn't stop again until I reached a 24-hour gas station in Delta. The clerk was a young guy, maybe 20, and I must have looked half-crazed when I stumbled in. I told him what I'd seen, a man on the road, asking for help, showing up at my truck window. The clerk frowned. "You stopped at the old rest area?" I nodded. He sighed. "You shouldn't have. Locals call that place Dead Man's Stop. Some drifter got killed there in the 90s. Used to knock on people's windows, ask for a ride. One night, he tried it on the wrong person. Got shot and left by the vending machines. Nobody found him for 3 days. I didn't believe him at first. It sounded like a ghost story meant to scare tourists. But when I left the gas station, I checked online. The story was real. A man named David Kane had been found dead at that rest stop in 1994. Gunshot to the chest. No suspect ever caught. I didn't sleep that night. I parked my truck behind the station, under the bright floodlights, and just sat there with the engine running. Every time a car passed on the highway, I jumped. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, exhaustion, isolation, the power of suggestion. But just before I pulled back onto the road, I noticed something on the passenger window. A handprint. Clear as day. It wasn't mine, it was larger, the fingers longer, spread wide. I wiped it with a rag, but it didn't fade. It wasn't on the outside of the glass. It was on the inside. I drove straight through to Colorado that day without stopping. That night, at another rest area, I kept the engine running, too afraid to turn it off. Around 2 a.m., I started to drift off. That's when it happened again. 3 slow knocks on the passenger window. I snapped awake, heart pounding. But when I looked, there was nothing. Just darkness. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was wind or a branch. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The condensation on the glass had formed words, faint, but visible. "Can you help me?" I slammed the truck into gear and drove until sunrise. A week later, while filling up in Nevada, I overheard 2 other truckers talking about the same stretch of road. One said he'd seen a man on the shoulder waving for help, but when he passed, there was no reflection in the side mirror. The other swore he'd heard knocking on his window while parked there, the same rhythmic tapping. They said it always happens around 3 a.m., always the same man, same question. A month after that, I heard on the radio that the rest stop had been permanently closed. Vandalism and unexplained incidents, the report said. But 2 months later, Driving through the area again, I saw it, the turnoff still there, the sign rusted but standing. Out of habit, my eyes drifted toward the lot as I passed. And in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I saw him again. Standing by the restroom door. Hand raised. Waiting for someone to stop. I didn't. I never have since. But even now, when I park at other rest areas, sometimes I'll hear soft knocking on the glass late at night, always 3 times, always slow. And once, when I dared to look, I thought I saw a reflection in the window, a pale face, eyes black, lips moving silently. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what he was saying. The end. The gas station that wasn't there. It happened in June of 2018, somewhere along Interstate 64 in Western Virginia. I was driving back from a delivery in Richmond, heading west toward Kentucky. It was late, around 12:40 a.m., and I'd been on the road since before noon. My eyelids were heavy, and I was running low on gas. The last few highway exits had been completely empty, no motels, no stations, not even a diner. Just the endless hum of tires and the dark stretch of road surrounded by trees. Around 1:15 a.m., I saw a sign that made me breathe a sigh of relief. A green reflective board on the right side of the highway, rest stop and gas, 2 miles. Finally. I'd been coasting on fumes for 20 minutes. When I reached the exit, the ramp curved down into a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. There was a little gas station, an old-style building with faded white paint and a flickering fluorescent sign that said Hilltop Service. 2 pumps stood out front, the kind with metal handles and analog dials. Beside it was a small convenience store with a single light glowing inside. It looked old, but clean enough. There was a single sedan parked near the pumps, and I remember thinking how strange it was that anyone else would be there at that hour. I parked by the second pump, stepped out, and stretched. The night was still. Not a single cricket. The air smelled faintly of pine and gasoline. Inside the store, an older man stood behind the counter. Thin, gray hair slicked back, plaid shirt tucked into his jeans. He looked up when I entered. "Evenin'," he said. "Hey there," I replied. "Didn't think I'd find a place open this late." "Been open every night since 1965, he said with a tired grin. I laughed lightly and handed him my card. "Fill up on pump 2, and a coffee if you've got one." He nodded, poured me a cup from an old metal pot, and handed it over. The coffee smelled burnt but strong. I remember noticing that the cup was one of those old paper types with blue stripes around the edge, the kind I hadn't seen in years. While I was paying, I glanced around. The place looked frozen in time. Candy bars with old wrappers, a small radio playing faint country music from a station I didn't recognize, and a corkboard on the wall covered with faded Polaroid photos of truckers and travelers. The dates on them went back decades. One photo caught my attention, a young man standing by a blue semi with McCready Freight on the side. The date written under it was June 12, 1984. That was the exact date on my phone's lock screen. June 12. I brushed it off as coincidence. When I looked up again, the man behind the counter was staring at me, not in a threatening way, but with an odd, almost sad expression. "Long night on the road?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just trying to make it to Charleston by morning." He nodded slowly. "Be careful on that stretch. Fog rolls in fast." "Thanks," I said, taking the receipt. As I stepped outside, the air felt heavier. The trees around the lot swayed slightly, though I couldn't feel any wind. The other car that had been there earlier was gone. I walked to the pump, finished fueling up, and glanced through the station window one more time. The man was still standing behind the counter, but the lights seemed dimmer now, like the bulbs were fading. I climbed back into my truck, started the engine, and merged back onto the highway. For a while, everything seemed normal. The dashboard clock read 1:47 a.m. I turned on the radio, just static. I tried another frequency. Same thing. Then I noticed the fog. It rolled in fast, just like the man had warned, thick, white, almost glowing under my headlights. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I slowed down to 40, gripping the wheel tighter. The road felt unfamiliar now, even though I'd just come from it. After about 15 minutes, I saw headlights ahead. Another car, a dark SUV, driving slowly through the fog. Relieved to have some company, I kept a safe distance behind. Then, as we approached a small rise, the SUV's brake lights flashed once, and it vanished. Just gone. No turnoff, no side road, no tire marks. I stopped completely, my heart hammering. The fog around me was silent, the air dead still. I sat there for a minute before deciding to keep going. Eventually, the fog thinned, and I saw another green sign ahead, next gas, 30 miles. That didn't make sense. The last station had been only a few miles back. I checked my fuel gauge, it was back where it had been before I stopped. Less than a quarter tank. I pulled over onto the shoulder, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was racing. Maybe the pump had malfunctioned. Maybe I'd forgotten to actually start fueling. But I remembered holding the nozzle, hearing the gas flow. I still had the receipt in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked closer. The date said June 12, 1984. I froze. I flipped it over, the ink was faded, the paper yellowed like it had aged decades. The name on the signature line wasn't mine. It said Earl D. I started driving again, faster this time. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I reached Charleston around sunrise and parked at a diner just off the interstate. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the receipt. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my phone and searched Hilltop Service Gas Station, Virginia. No results. I tried Hilltop Service Interstate 64. There was one mention, a small local history page. It said the station had burned down in 1985 after an electrical fire. The owner, an older man named Earl Dawson, had died inside trying to save the property. My stomach turned cold. That night, I drove back the same route, just to be sure. Around midnight, I passed the same mile markers, the same stretch of forest, but there was no exit. No ramp. No lights. Just trees. I pulled over and checked my GPS. Nothing. The rest area didn't exist. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. Then, about a month later, I ran into another driver at a truck stop in Kentucky. We got to talking about creepy places on the road, and he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He said, "You ever hear of that phantom gas station on 64? Some folks say you can still stop there if you're low on fuel. Everything looks normal, lights, pumps, even the guy inside. But when you drive away, your tank's empty again." I asked him if he'd ever seen it himself. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. Twice. First time was 10 years ago, second was last year. Both times, the guy behind the counter called me by name. And I swear to God, I never told him." I left without finishing my meal. A week later, I found the courage to check the receipt again. The paper had gotten darker, the ink almost vanished. I decided to throw it away. But when I went to the trash bin the next morning, it was sitting back on my dashboard. Exactly where I'd left it the night I found it. I don't drive that route anymore. But sometimes, when I'm running low on gas late at night, I'll see an exit sign glowing faintly in the distance, one that isn't supposed to be there. And every time, my fuel gauge flickers, just once, like it's waiting for me to decide whether to stop. I never do. Because I know what's waiting at Hilltop Service. The end. The suitcase by the bench. It happened in August of 2022, on a quiet stretch of Interstate 15 in Idaho. I was driving north from Salt Lake City to Helena, Montana, carrying a shipment of medical equipment. It was one of those nights where the air feels too still, too heavy, like the world is holding its breath. The highway was empty for miles, just the hum of my engine and the faint glow of stars over the desert. It was a little after 3 a.m. when I decided to pull over at a rest area near the Pocatello exit. I'd been fighting off sleep for the last half hour, my vision starting to blur around the edges. The rest stop was small, maybe 6 parking spaces, a single restroom building, and 2 wooden benches near a line of old vending machines. The lamps overhead flickered with that faint greenish tint that old bulbs get before they die. I parked under one of them, left the engine idling, and got out to stretch. The air was cool but dry, and everything was quiet, too quiet. Then I saw it. A suitcase. It was sitting by one of the benches, maybe 20 feet from the restroom door. Black, medium-sized, scuffed around the corners. It looked out of place, sitting there perfectly upright, handle extended, like someone had just set it down and walked away. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave things behind all the time, coolers, coffee mugs, even the occasional duffel bag. But this was different. There were no cars in the lot except mine. No sign of anyone else. And the suitcase wasn't dusty or weathered. It looked new. I glanced around, expecting to see someone nearby, maybe in the restroom or walking a dog, but the entire place was silent. Even the vending machines had gone dark. I walked closer, flashlight in hand. The case had a faint tag attached to the handle, but it was blank. No name, no address. I crouched down and touched it. The surface was cold, colder than the night air. That's when I noticed something odd. The suitcase was slightly vibrating. Not like from wind or the ground, it was rhythmic, faint, like something moving inside. I pulled my hand back fast. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" No answer. I waited for a full minute, scanning the lot. Still nothing. My brain was trying to rationalize it, maybe a phone left inside, maybe an electric toothbrush still running. I laughed nervously at that thought, but it didn't feel funny. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen stayed black. No signal, no response. Dead. Something inside the suitcase thumped. Once. Then again. A slow, deliberate sound, like a fist striking from the inside. Every instinct screamed to leave it alone, but I couldn't move. Curiosity had its claws in me. I reached down and grabbed the handle. The case felt heavier than it should, not the kind of heavy you get from clothes or books, but dense, uneven, like the weight was shifting slightly. I dragged it a few feet closer to my truck under the light. The flicker above me intensified, buzzing louder. I crouched down again, fingers brushing over the zipper. For a second, I almost opened it. Then I saw the note. A small folded piece of paper taped to the side, nearly blending into the black fabric. In faded handwriting, it said, "Thank you for not opening." My mouth went dry. I dropped the handle immediately and stepped back. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The lamp above me flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the area into near darkness. I bolted back to the truck, slammed the door, and locked it. For several seconds, I sat there staring at the suitcase through the windshield. It was still in the same place, a dark silhouette near the bench. Then it moved. Just a few inches, like someone had nudged it from behind. I turned the ignition and floored it. Gravel sprayed from the tires as I shot back onto the highway. My headlights caught the suitcase one last time in the mirror. It had tipped onto its side, the handle pointing toward the road. I didn't stop until I reached a truck stop 50 miles north. When I finally pulled over, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the key. I sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself it had all been exhaustion and imagination. The next morning, over breakfast, I told another driver what happened. He looked at me like he'd heard it before. "Black suitcase, right? Note on the side?" I nodded slowly. He leaned back, staring out the window. "You're not the first. Happened to a buddy of mine last year. He was hauling livestock through Idaho. Said he stopped at that same rest area, saw the suitcase by the bench. Thought it was weird, but he didn't touch it. He said the next morning, when he drove by again, state police had the place taped off." "Why?" I asked. "They found a suitcase," he said. Same one, probably. Had human remains inside. They traced it back to a missing person case from 10 years ago. Whoever left it there must keep bringing it back. I didn't know what to say. 2 nights later, I was driving through Montana when I noticed something in my side mirror. A small, dark shape on the shoulder of the highway, illuminated briefly by my taillights. A suitcase. I told myself it couldn't be the same one. There was no way. But the next morning, at a gas station, I opened my truck's back compartment to grab a wrench, and there it was. A black suitcase. Sitting neatly against the back wall. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't stopped anywhere long enough for someone to put it there. My brain was scrambling for an explanation, maybe another driver playing a prank, maybe my eyes lying to me. I reached for it with shaking hands, half expecting it to be empty. But when I lifted it, it was just as heavy as before. The same cold, uneven weight. And taped to the side, the same note. Thank you for not opening. I dropped it instantly and stumbled backward, slamming the compartment shut. I didn't call the police. I didn't stop driving. I just kept going until I crossed the state line. When I finally opened that compartment again days later, the suitcase was gone. Since then, I've read online about other travelers seeing it, mostly truckers, some late-night commuters. Always the same story, a lone suitcase by a bench or roadside. Sometimes there's a note. Sometimes it's open. Those who've looked inside don't talk about what they saw. One article mentioned a retired state trooper who worked that region. He said they'd received reports for over 15 years, sightings of the same black suitcase appearing and disappearing across different rest stops. Forensics never found fingerprints. The contents always the same, something human, but never the same person twice. I don't know if that's true, and I don't want to know. A few months ago, I was parked at a rest stop in Nevada around midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I sat outside with a cup of coffee. The wind was cold, the night quiet. And then, from somewhere near the vending machines, I heard the faint sound of wheels rolling over concrete. I turned my flashlight on, but there was nothing there. Still, I could hear it, the soft, rhythmic sound of something being dragged slowly across the ground. I didn't stay to see what it was. Now, whenever I pull into a rest stop and see a bench sitting alone under a flickering light, I make sure not to look too closely. Because I know what might be waiting there. A suitcase. Upright. Perfectly still. And taped to the side, a note I already know by heart. Thank you for not opening. The end. The girl in the blue hoodie. It happened in October of 2020, on a lonely stretch of Highway 61 between Baton Rouge and Natchez, Mississippi. I was driving home from a delivery in New Orleans, heading north with my rig loaded half empty after a cancellation. The sky had been dark for hours, and by 2 a.m., fog rolled thick across the road. The kind that swallows headlights whole. The highway was quiet, no tail lights, no oncoming beams. Just the occasional flash of a mile marker and the steady hum of the engine. I was half hypnotized by the rhythm of the road when I saw a flicker of blue on the right shoulder. At first, I thought it was trash blowing in the wind, but as I slowed, I realized it was a person, a young woman walking along the highway, wearing a blue hoodie. Her head was down, hands stuffed into her pockets. I rolled down the window as I pulled alongside her. "Hey, you okay?" I called out. She stopped walking, looked up slowly. Her face was pale in the glow of my headlights, too pale, like she hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. Her eyes were glassy, almost gray, and her lips trembled when she spoke. "My car broke down," she said softly. "I just need to get to the next town." I hesitated. Every warning I'd ever heard about picking up strangers flashed through my head. But she looked small, scared, maybe 19, 20 at most. The night was cold, and I couldn't in good conscience leave her there. "All right," I said finally. "Hop in. I'll take you as far as Natchez." She climbed up carefully, closing the door without a sound. Her hoodie was soaked at the bottom, probably from walking through wet grass. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. For the first few miles, neither of us spoke. The road ahead was swallowed by fog. I turned down the radio, trying to ease the silence. "So, where exactly are you headed?" I asked. "Home," she said softly. "Where's home?" "Just north of here." Her voice was calm, almost monotone. I nodded. "You got family waiting?" She didn't answer right away. After a few seconds, she whispered, "My mom." I tried to make small talk after that, but she barely said another word. She kept her gaze fixed on the road, hands folded neatly in her lap. I noticed her nails were clean, but the skin on her fingers looked raw, like she'd been gripping something too tightly for too long. About 15 minutes later, I reached a rest stop I knew well, a small one, just before the turnoff to Natchez. I figured she might want to call someone or warm up a bit. "We'll stop here for a few minutes," I said. She didn't move or respond. "Hey," I said gently. "You want to stretch your legs?" Slowly, she turned her head toward me. Her expression didn't change, but her voice sounded almost detached when she said, "I've been here before." That made me pause. "This rest stop?" I asked. She nodded once, still staring at the building outside. The fog had thickened, wrapping the lampposts in white halos. The vending machines buzzed faintly, the only sound in the stillness. I left the truck idling. "I'll grab us some coffee," I said, stepping out. "You want anything?" She didn't reply. Inside the small restroom building, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and cleaning solution. I poured 2 coffees from the machine, took a sip, and walked back toward the truck. But when I opened the door, she wasn't there. The passenger seat was empty. The door was still locked from the inside. I scanned the parking lot, calling out, "Hey! You out here?" My voice echoed off the concrete walls. No answer. The fog had grown so thick I could barely see past the edge of the lot. I circled the building, checked behind the benches, even peeked inside the women's restroom. Nothing. I started to feel that creeping sense of dread, the one that tells you something isn't right. My headlights cut through the fog, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flash of blue near the trees. I started toward it, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Hello?" I called again. "Are you all right?" No sound. When I reached the spot, there was nothing. Just the edge of the forest, dark and still. But then I noticed something on the ground, small footprints leading from the pavement into the grass. Bare footprints. She hadn't been wearing shoes. I followed the tracks a few steps before they stopped abruptly, as if she'd vanished mid-step. The grass wasn't disturbed beyond that point. I stood there for a moment, listening. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves. Then, from somewhere behind me, a voice whispered, "Thank you for stopping." I turned, shining the light wildly across the lot, nothing. But when I looked back at the truck, I froze. She was sitting inside again. Passenger seat. Hands folded. Eyes forward. I ran toward the cab, heart pounding, and yanked the door open. The seat was empty. The coffee cup I'd left on the dashboard had tipped over, its contents spilled across the floor. The air inside the cab was freezing, like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. I climbed in, slammed the door, and drove off as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel straight. A few miles down the road, I saw a sign, "Welcome to Natchez." The fog began to thin, and I started to calm down. I told myself I must have imagined it, exhaustion, nerves, isolation. But when I glanced at the passenger seat again, something caught my eye. A single blue shoelace. It was damp, coiled neatly beside the seat belt buckle. I nearly swerved off the road. I tossed it onto the floor and drove straight into town, where I parked at a diner that stayed open all night. I went inside, ordered coffee, and sat there staring into space until the sun came up. When the waitress noticed how shaken I looked, she asked if I was all right. I told her what happened, the girl, the rest stop, the shoelace. She went pale. You saw her, she said quietly. Who? I asked. The girl in the blue hoodie. She explained that years ago, around 2017, a young woman had been found dead near that same rest stop. Her car had broken down on the highway. Someone offered her a ride, but she never made it home. They found her body 3 days later in the woods behind the rest area, barefoot, wearing a blue hoodie. Locals still see her sometimes, she said. Always walking along the shoulder, always asking for a ride. I didn't believe her, or maybe I didn't want to. But when I got back to my truck later that morning, I noticed something I couldn't explain. The shoelace was gone. In its place, resting on the seat, was a folded napkin from the diner. On it, written in shaky blue ink, were the words, "You got me home." I sat there for a long time, just staring at it. I don't know how it got there. I didn't tell anyone else what I'd seen, not the police, not other drivers. But sometimes, when I'm driving that same route late at night, I still glance at the shoulder of the road. Every so often, I think I see her, a faint shape in blue, walking slowly through the fog, head down, hands in her pockets. And I keep driving, because part of me knows she's not lost anymore. But another part of me wonders, if I'd never stopped that night, would she still be waiting? The end.